within about probably 2 weeks of having a go-kart, I knew all I wanted to do was be a professional race car driver.
Welcome to the Details Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Williams, Dan E. Williams, and that E stands for E. That's my entire middle name. As you know, the Details Podcast is where we find the intersection of auto enthusiasm and business, and today we are going to do just that. I have special guest, grandson of Parnelli Jones, who just passed away, and I'd like to offer my condolences to the entire Jones family and to the world of racing, as we've truly lost a legend. But I have Jagger Jones, his grandson, who's an up-and-coming racer, well on his way to IndyCar racing. He's racing right now at the NXT level and in sports cars and multiple other things. He was an incredible interview. I cannot wait to share this with you. Let's start it out like this. Gentlemen, start your podcast. Welcome to the Details Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Williams of the Details Podcast. And as you know, this is a podcast where we tie together all things from the automotive world, car culture, and business. I have today with me Jagger Jones, grandson of Parnelli Jones, and a legend racer. And he's got an amazing career that is sparking up for him in his young career. And I'm so excited to have him on. Mr. Jagger, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, and thank you for having me on. I think you touched on it a bit, but aspiring race car driver myself, and I was born into the right family. I definitely have it in my blood, so the goal for me is IndyCar, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about that, but that's kind of just a brief overview of who I am.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Coming from a family that's been in racing for years and years and years, it would almost seem that you were destined to do this. However, as I was kind of doing my research on you, I didn't notice, did your pops race also?
Yes, so my grandpa raced. He won the Indy 500 in 1963. He raced everything from Indy cars, won NASCAR races, won the Baja 1000 multiple times, Trans Am Championship. He was a true American hero of motorsports back in the 60s and 70s. And then he actually owned a Formula One team, an IndyCar team, multiple Indy 500 wins as a team owner as well, and then went into the business of Firestone tire stores and real estate, all different stuff after his career. So he had a very successful career in racing and in the business world. And my dad and my uncle were both race car drivers. They grew up racing sprint cars and midgets in Southern California and all around the world, our country. And then my dad went on and he raced GTP. He won the 24 Hours of Daytona. He raced IndyCar a bit, NASCAR. And yeah, then once he had me, it was kind of not necessarily forced. I didn't start racing till I was about 9 or 10 years old, which, sounds super early, but a lot of the kids that I'm racing against today started when they were 4, 5 years old. But my parents never pushed it on me. My mom actually quite did the opposite. She kind of held me and my brother back from racing until it was just too out of control, where that's all we kept bugging our parents to do, to buy us a go-kart. And one thing led to the next. And within about probably 2 weeks of having a go-kart, I knew all I wanted to do was be a professional race car driver.
Man, that's incredible. And it's funny because when I was doing my research, the stuff about your pops didn't come up, but your grandpa, tons and tons and tons. So I was definitely curious about that. So you got your first go-kart. What was that part like? I mean, do you remember getting the first go-kart, what it looked like the first time you sat down in that and you were kind of emulating what your dad and your grandpa were already doing? How did that feel?
Yeah, so actually my first go-kart I got was for my 6th birthday, and it was a blue go-kart with 24 on it. It had the Jeff Gordon numbers. So it looked like a Jeff Gordon little go-kart. I was about 6 years old, and we'd go to the track probably 3 times a year until I was about 9 years old. I don't really know why I never really got into it. I think a lot of it was my parents just kept it casual, wanted me to, just drive a bit and see how it was. And then we started getting more into it. And then I bought a bigger go-kart when I was 9 years. For my ninth birthday, I got the bigger go-kart, and it was more of a, race ready kart. And from there, I remember drove to California. I lived in Arizona. We went to a go-kart race to pick it up from Buddy Rice when he had a go-kart team and a go-kart shop back in the day. We went to this huge national race, but just to pick up the cart. And I remember just watching, I'm like, I want to do this. And so I got that cart, and next thing you know, we were at the track just about every week. And there was a race coming up in Arizona, probably 2 or 3 weeks after I got the cart. And my dad was like, well, do you want to do it? And I was like, of course, yes. And it didn't go very well the first race. I remember I didn't know how to do the start, so I accidentally went the wrong way on the track or something. And I remember my dad was yelling at me and I was crying, and it was like an eventful first race where you think it would have turned me away. My mom was like, "All right, this is terrible. The kid's crying. My dad's yelling at me." But I was like, "You know what? I love this. I want to do it. I'm going to figure this out." And I remember within probably 3 or 4 months I was already competing for wins. And then we went to California and did the full regional and national scene the next year. And I remember on the first race I did, we went there with no expectations, and I crashed on the last lap passing for the win. So I think right there that just instantly sparked the hunger in me. And I had that from a kid. I remember watching my dad and my grandpa growing up, and I had, race cars as toys, a race car bed, and that was kind of my whole life already. But then my personal passion for motorsports kind of sparked around then.
So as you're getting this go-kart and you're starting to race, like what influences do you have your dad and your grandpa come into races and I would imagine you were more set up than most people just because of where you came from.
Yeah, we were. I think my brother was a couple years younger, and we kind of ran a team ourselves, but kind of loosely based with another team. But I mean, at that national and regional level in karting, it's really intense. I mean, people are spending a lot of money, and there's a lot of guys that are, doing as much as they can, financially and whatnot to run a good program. And we were kind of in that same boat. And I just remember every race going there expecting to win. And there was a lot of pressure from a young age, but I think a lot of it was brought on myself. And, I loved it, and that's all I wanted to do. I pretty much quit every other sport that I was doing, younger: baseball, football, basketball, just so I could spend more time in racing. And I know it became trouble about, fourth, fifth grade, when you have to miss a lot of school. Living in Arizona, we didn't have a ton of races locally. So we were driving to California, 6 hour drive, probably 20 times a year, and then probably 10 or 15 more weekends flying or going even further than California. And then eventually, I won the national championship in the US, which led me, a scholarship to go over and race in Europe a bit in karting. So when I was between 12 and 14, I raced all over the country in the US. And then I went to Europe 4 or 5 times a year for 3 years to race. So it was a busy schedule, all while being in a normal school. I never did the online school, all the way through finishing college. I always did the in-person stuff. So it became definitely tricky, but I think how passionate I was about it never seemed like a job or work. It was always like, this is what I want to do, no matter how much work it takes.
Did everybody kind of know who your family was the whole time? Like it almost seems like I would have probably had a patch that I was making sure everybody knew who I was if that was where I came from.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it definitely helps. Especially now, later in my career, I think it helps a lot more than as a younger kid. I think one, it brings a little bit of expectation, with just the family name and whatnot. I think people also can look at you negatively, kind of saying, "Oh, you have all this handed to you," which isn't necessarily the case by any means for me. But I think you just kind of have to focus on yourself and do the best you can, have the right people around you, and but at the same time too, it is a big family name, but the racing world is a very small world where there is a lot of family names that come through karting. Big when I went over and raced in Europe, I was not racing against, but at the same races. He was a bit older. Was Michael Schumacher's son, and all these other different legends, their kids and grandkids. So it definitely was notable, but it wasn't anything too abnormal. And I was around other kids with similar history.
Now, when you were going to these races and you had this go-kart, were you learning how to do the mechanic side of stuff too? And that's something that you guys did yourself?
Yeah, I would eventually got to a point where I would just race for a team. We'd show up. They were kind of more in control of, I had a mechanic, there was a coach for the team, kind of separated from the family, or like, running your own team out of the trailer. Because when we would race, everyone from Indianapolis to California to Europe, we would kind of just fly to the races, and the team would drive from, race to race and have everything set up, because it's kind of a logistical nightmare to try to do on your own. So I think that it was like a bit different once you first started, and you can run a little race team out of the back of the truck, but the karting stuff gets very intense, and there's a lot that goes into it as you kind of go to the bigger national and international races.
Yeah, and your team really, if we think about the team, how as you keep climbing up the ladder and getting to larger and larger things, how does the team grow, and the dynamics of the team, and the way that you start interacting and working with the people that are on your race team?
Yeah, in this sport, I mean, it's so crucial to be with the right people, have the right people around you, and drive the right equipment, because, even from karting to the Indianapolis 500 and everything in between, if you're the best driver in the world, but you don't have the right equipment on you with you, then you pretty much can have no chance of winning, especially when you're in super, super competitive series and the drivers are all divided by a fraction of a second. And if you're lacking with on the equipment side, there's only so much you can make up as a driver. So it's super important to have the right, you know at the level I'm racing at now, we have multiple engineers per team. There's the whole mechanical side of having the car set up right. There's so much that goes into it. A lot of it's financially based. You have to have the right sponsors and the right funding to be able to hire the right people, and or even take that money to the right team. So there's so much that goes into it in racing, where it's not just all in my control, which that's a factor. Kind of a different subject, but there's so much outside of your control in racing. So you have to kind of have the best people around you to, give you the best equipment, to give you the best chance to keep climbing through the ranks, keep winning, and, hopefully eventually become that top level professional driver.
And now you're one step under IndyCar, like Indy 500 IndyCar. So you're almost there. Here's this. When you do win the Indy 500 and you're super duper famous, you got to promise to come back on and give me another interview, even though I'm small compared to in compare. That's that's the deal. That's the deal.
That is definitely the goal. The Indy 500, obviously, that's the biggest part of my family history is my grandpa winning the 500 as a driver and team owner, and since I was a kid, that's I remember spending the month of May when I was 4 or 5 years old in Indianapolis, and now I live here, so it's pretty cool, and it's all that's the top level goal, is to win the Indianapolis 500, and kind of everything I do is, you know, backward steps of, okay, how do I get myself to that point? So it's a pretty high goal, but yeah, like you said, I'm in the Indy Next series, which is the series just below IndyCar, and the goal is to, one more year after this one, and hopefully then be being paid to be an IndyCar driver and give myself a chance to win the Indy 500 every year for the next 10, 15 years.
And then come back on the podcast with me.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sure the media requests will definitely be a bit more intense when that happens, but I will definitely do my best. That would be a cool full circle story.
Absolutely. So, okay, now, when you're a little kid and you're racing, you're learning how to drive the car, how to stay in your lane, where to be, and they're going, not as fast. But as you start getting older and the cars get bigger, the down force of the car and how the car handles, you start to really come into your own understanding and have a feel for the car. When do you remember kind of the first time that you really started to understand how the physics or the dynamics of the wind and all of those things started playing into the car, and develop how you could communicate with your engineers and your team to make sure that the car was running?
Yeah, and I think this is what will surprise a lot of people. Like I still go and coach karting kids that are super young, and the feedback they give is insane for how young they are. I remember being, 10, 11 years old, and I could come off the track and, tell you exactly what the cart was doing in every single corner and, kind of lead the team and whatnot to what changes they need to make on the go-kart. So I think that foundation started. I feel like that was an advantage I had when I was younger. I was always really good at giving feedback of what I needed to go quicker. And then obviously as you move from karting to cars, that's what makes a good race car driver a great race car driver is being able to communicate with the team and the engineers what you need as a driver to go faster, because there's a lot of guys that can drive a great car and win races, but there's not as many drivers that can take an okay car to a super fast car and then drive it well. So it's such a huge part of racing. And I think every single year, and it's definitely different from every car you drive. I did a lot of NASCAR stuff where the setups and the cars are completely different. And then when I started doing the open wheel stuff and the IndyCar stuff, I kind of had to relearn everything of, what to look for, what I need in a race car, and able to go fast and win races. So there's so much into it. And like you mentioned the mechanical side. I definitely, pay attention to that a bit, but I'm more focused as a driver on the engineering side of, what changes do what different things. And I'll take notes on, we made this change here. How did it affect the car? Was it better? So I can go back and look and say, just have kind of a baseline of what direction. But my main job as a driver is not to tell them what to change on the car, but tell them what I need, what feeling I need in order to make the car go faster. And then I'll work together with the engineers, and then we'll kind of come to we'll agree on what change will give me that feel to be able to go quicker.
And I guess even things that are just microscopic changes when you're going that fast really make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so my last race, this is a good example, but my last race was at St. Petersburg, Florida on the IndyCar race weekend, but it was in a sports car, a prototype car called an LMP3. And the first race, well, I had a really successful weekend and won both races, but the first race, we had two races on Saturday that weekend. The first race, I won the race, but I was hanging on. The guy in second was, catching me a bit. I was really struggling with the car. It was, oversteering, sliding all over the track. And I'm like, okay, we won. Like, I was thankful because I was struggling a street track. A lot of opportunities to crash, especially when the car's that free. And then in between the first and second race, I sit down, we meet with the engineer and the team, and they're like, all right, what changed? Blah, blah, blah. And we changed 2 millimeters of rake. So rake is basically if the car is pointed more this way or more this way. So when we lowered the rear end of the car just 2 millimeters, it went from a car that was all over the track to pretty much a perfect handling car. And I went and won the second race by, way bigger number. And it was a lot easier to drive. So just the most Microsoft or smallest changes make such a big difference in racing. And it takes a whole team to get that all right.
How fast are the cars that you're in right now going? What kind of speeds are you hitting?
So the Indy Next cars will, if we when we run on the oval, we're getting up to close to about 200 miles an hour. So very quick. On some of the road courses, not nearly as fast, but the cornering speed is pretty intense. So we race on both ovals, road courses, street courses. But yeah, the ovals are definitely the quickest.
Is there one of those tracks that's more fun or more challenging that you prefer to race on?
That's what I love about IndyCar racing is kind of the diversity of the different tracks they race on, everywhere from Long Beach or St. Pete, which are really tight, narrow street courses where if you have to be within inches or centimeters of the wall to be able to go quick, and there's no room for error. But then you go to an oval, which we don't race at Indianapolis Motor Speedway in my series, but IndyCar does, where they're going 240 miles an hour trying to hold it wide open when there's again one little wiggle, you're in the wall at 200 miles an hour. There's a lot of danger involved. And then you go to really great racetracks, permanent racetracks like Laguna Seca, Road America, these, iconic racetracks that are so fun to drive in a fast car like that. So I think one thing I do love about IndyCar racing compared to a lot of other forms of racing is how different all the tracks are, and that with it takes a driver that's I look back to my grandpa's era and guys like Mario Andretti. I actually got a chance to do an interview with him last week, and one thing we talked about was how diverse the drivers were back in my grandpa's day. Like I mentioned, he raced NASCAR, IndyCar, off-road Baja 1000, Trans Am sports cars. Mario raced Formula One along with all of those things. They would do, dirt oval tracks is kind of what they started. So those guys were quick in every single car they drove. And I really, respect that they could make anything with four wheels go quick. And I think that's what's cool about IndyCar. Obviously, it's a little bit more specialized now than it used to be, but there's still such a different, diverse group of racetracks that we get to race on.
So you got like 15 years or so under your belt so far of being behind the wheel. What are maybe a couple of highlights that you've experienced so far that are just kind of really stand out as you think back?
Yeah, so I think like my biggest accomplishment when I was a kid and kind of summed up my karting career was I think 2014 winning the United States National Championship was really cool to achieve that against like a lot of drivers that, are in Formula 2 and V8 supercars in Australia, people that kind of came in all over the country and world to race this championship, and to win that was a huge accomplishment. And then I worked my way from karting. I did some NASCAR stuff and I won a ARCA race my first year, my rookie year in California, which was a really big win for me. And that kind of, I think, really elevated my name and, gave me a lot of recognition. And then I went and switched to open wheel about 2.5 years ago racing, and I won my second ever open wheel race, which was at Barber Motorsports Park, which was a thrill, which was really awesome to be able to do that. And then last year in the Indy Next, which is such a competitive series with a lot of guys coming over from Europe racing, the best of the best trying to make it to IndyCar. I finished second in a race last year at Detroit, and I wasn't necessarily with the best team. We weren't the fastest team, so a bit underfunded as well compared to the Andretti and big teams we were racing against. So to be able to finish second was a huge accomplishment for us last year at that race. Some good finishes as well, and also won some sports car races recently. So there's a lot of good going right now, and it's just got to keep it up and keep winning to make it to IndyCar.
Things go wrong, right? What are some of like the biggest challenges or hurdles that you've had to overcome in your career so far?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumps out of me is so I went from karting to the NASCAR stuff, did the NASCAR stuff from about 2017 through 2019, finished second in the ARCA championship in 2019. I was voted upcoming, or I forget the award, but it was like best upcoming driver in NASCAR that year. Really successful, had a lot of momentum. In 2020, COVID hit, and the sponsorship deals I was putting together to go into the NASCAR Truck Series kind of all fell apart in March of 2020. And it's really tough. Like, even if you're doing well, the family name, like myself, a driver that is winning in the series, if you don't have the sponsorship dollars at that level, then that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of opportunity, if you don't have the sponsorship and don't have the funding behind you. So it was tough. I didn't race for pretty much all of 2020, all of 2021. I didn't race at all. And, I was working. I went to college end of 2020, but I was still focusing on trying to get back into NASCAR originally. And it just didn't have a lot of open doors and opportunities that I was pushing for, but nothing really came. And about middle year 2021, I sat down and kind of rethought of everything. And I said, well, maybe, I've been so focusing on this NASCAR route and nothing's kind of coming my way. Maybe if I, expand my horizons and kind of think of other opportunities that can get me back in a race car. And that's when I found an opportunity to get into an open wheel car in the USF 2000 series for 2022 with, the best team. And I was like, well, this does kind of help a lot with the goal of wanting to win the Indy 500 one day. And I've always loved open wheel IndyCar racing. It was kind of almost weird that I didn't do that originally. I went to the NASCAR stuff. So I took that opportunity and we were able to get some people behind me to help. And yeah, then, that challenge of 2 years not racing, now having to learn an entire new driving style, racing pretty much solely on road courses versus the last 3 years, I pretty much only raced on ovals in a car that weighed about 2 to 3 times as much as the car that I now have to learn how to drive. So that was a huge challenge, but luckily I got a fair bit of testing before the season, and I finished third the first weekend. Second weekend went out and won, and I was leading the points about halfway through the season. So that was, it was cool to be able to come that challenge of not racing for 2 years and jump back in a whole different car and come out, really successful. And I think that's one thing, like in my racing career growing up, I'll always think back of that time of 2 years not racing. I think made me even hungrier than if I was just consistently racing. Obviously, if I could, I would go back and change it. But that hunger definitely grew inside of me after sitting on the sidelines for a bit.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who watch racing, they don't really understand the complexities and everything that goes into the backside of racing. Like, you almost think that you would find a team and that you would want to be on that team for your whole career. But it's really not like that. Most people jump around from team to team and they maybe stick with the team for a couple years. How does that part work for you when do you go out and actively search for somebody and say, hey, I want to race on your team? Or do they reach out to you? And how do you make those big decisions? Because that really is kind of what's going to set you on the winner's circle or not.
Yeah, so it's very tough, and like I was talking about before, you have to be with the right team in order to win and give yourself a chance of being great. And at the level I am now, pretty much until you get to the top level of NASCAR, top level of IndyCar, Formula One, the teams require drivers to bring funding. So for me to race in the Indy Next series, it costs about $1.5 million. And no matter if I almost won the championship last year and I'm the guy expecting it to win this year, or I'm the top upcoming kid and every team would love to have me on their team, if I don't come up with that money, then there's a very, very high chance that I won't be able to race that year. And so it's very difficult because $1.5 million to raise at this level is very tough. But luckily, I have good people helping me, and it's been a struggle. And it's a struggle for a lot of people, that pretty much everyone that doesn't come from a lot of family money or have connections through their dad's business or whatever it may be. If you don't have that, it's very tough. So it takes a lot of finding sponsors that want to be a part and support you and be a part of the, marketing program that and marketing campaign that you're kind of leading as a race car driver. Also, there's different things from investment funds to private investors that, have helped drivers get to IndyCar. So I kind of do a mix of all of those things. I have people helping me on the sponsorship side, which, we're actively looking. Like, I'm not doing the full Indy next season this year because I didn't come up with a full sponsorship budget in order to do it. That's why I'm doing kind of a few races and some sports car races as well. But I have, other people helping me as well. That Mike Cole, for example, manages me, who's the lead principal of Chip Ganassi Racing, who is the top IndyCar team. So I have great people, and I'm thankful. A lot of that's because of my family history, but it still doesn't, solve the problem. You have to come up with that money at this level, and then eventually, once you win at this level, then IndyCar teams will look at you and say, "Oh, well, that guy's really good. We want him in our car. We're going to pay you, $1 million your first year," or whatever it may be, or maybe it might be even less. Hey, we'll let you come drive for free in IndyCar, and you have to take those opportunities, and hopefully eventually you're getting paid the amount that you think you deserve. But there's definitely a process to it, and it's very tricky to find the financial backing at this level.
Yeah. So, and you work with Ralph Hansen Jr.
Yes.
as one of the people. How did you come into that relationship? And how does he, with what he's a legend. He's been in the industry
Mhm.
forever and ever, and was Tony Hulman's personal assistant. And but
Yeah. So
how did you
I
make
should
that
have meant
connection?
Yeah, I should have mentioned Ralph because Ralph's been helping me, and that's how we got connected for this podcast. But Ralph is someone who's been helping me fairly recently with the sponsorship endeavors. So I got connected with Ralph through a guy named Mike Lashmet, who is the head of Vintage Indy. He runs a series, couple events a year with all vintage Indy cars. It's really awesome to see, those old cars still running, driving around tracks today. But he's a good friend of mine, and he's been trying to, help me and introduce me to the right people. And Ralph was one. And I sat down with Ralph earlier this year at St. Pete, Florida, and it was the day after I just won both the races in St. Pete. So I think that helped Ralph become interested in me. You're only as good as your last race, as I always say. And at that time when I talked to him, it was the perfect time since I just won my last two races. So um, I think with the family name and the success I've had, then he was interested in me, and we've developed a good relationship in a short three or 4 months. But he's working hard to, like I said, come up with that money in order to for me to be able next year to go race with the best team and give the best effort for me to win the Indy Next Championship, which will lead me to IndyCar. So it just takes people like Ralph that have a great background in the sport. He worked for, yeah, like you said, and he worked for Mario Andretti and a bunch of people, Newman Haas. So he's definitely has the credentials to go out and find money and help me support me. So I'm looking forward to what comes with that in the future.
Yeah. And Ralph and I are fraternity brothers, Theta Chi fraternity brothers. And if you were a Theta Chi, I imagine
That's awesome.
that would have been said to me sooner in the thing. But I did read in my research for you that you're in a fraternity as well.
Yeah. I was in Kappa Sigma at High Point University. So I graduated 6 months ago in December. 3.5 years I was able to finish with a major in business administration and finance and economics as well. So it was cool to be able to go to school, and that was something I always wanted to do along with the racing, which again wasn't necessarily easy to get both of those handled at the same time. But I think it helps a lot with the sponsorship stuff. It helps me. I learned how to everything about business and racing. There's excuse me, so much business in racing. I almost look at it more of a business than a sport. Even like I kind of look at myself as my own business, everything from the social media to the performance on the racetrack to, the right connections and people I meet. Because, for someone to want to put $1.5 million into a 21-year-old, then they have to really believe in him, and he's got to be pretty switched on. So I think that's definitely helped me, and I enjoyed it. College is obviously a good time, and to have a little bit of balance outside of racing was good. And I think it definitely helps when you come back into the racing world and keeps that hunger there.
Now, was your thought of going in with business and finance, um, because your grandpa did own race car teams and IndyCar teams and stuff. So do you look like way off into the distance and think maybe one day that you want to participate in that aspect as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. I've never really been a huge fan of, like, or ever thought of it as like the reason I went to college was plan B, or a plan B if the racing doesn't work out. I always looked at it as something that's going to support my racing and something that will help me after. Hopefully, I am successful and can make some money racing. Then, I obviously need to I would like to turn that into something more after my racing career. So I never looked at it as a plan B, always a part of plan A. And I would like to go into some sort of business stuff following the racing career. But I mean, right now I'm already in so much business of my own racing, and that's my primary focus. But yeah, like I said, it definitely helps. And yeah, definitely later down the road. And I considered like the engineering route, but I know about 10 upcoming race car drivers that all started off as engineering majors in college, trying to do both at the same time. And within the first semester, they were all switched out of it because it was a little too difficult to do both at the same time. So I was kind of wanted to be realistic and be able to finish it in 3.5 years to focus more on the racing. And I think business will help me more in the long run than the engineering, because I think I already learned so much about the engineering just being in the racing world.
Yeah, and the business side gives you the aspect to be the team owner, and you can hire a whole
Yeah,
bunch of engineers, whoever you want. I
exactly.
really don't think that people who watch racing really realize that part of the backstory to racing and how
Hmm.
that works. I find that fascinating. Like, I never really would have thought that the race car driver would have to bring the money. It
Hmm.
seems like they're going to be like, "Hey, we want you to be racing this car because you're the best, and we're going to pay you a whole bunch of money." That's how my imagination kind of played it out. But
Yeah, I mean, it gets to that once you get to the top level, but it's not like football where, you have a bunch of college scouts coming to high school saying, "Oh, we want this guy," offering this guy, and now they're getting paid. And at the level I'm at, it's very rare to find those opportunities, and it's such an expensive sport where I have to bring 1.5 million to the team next year because it probably costs about a 100 grand less than 1.5 million. So the teams like aren't just taking money from these drivers, but that's what it takes. It's expensive. You have to think, we race 15 races all around the country, and they have to drive transporters there, have to hire 5, 6 people almost full time to run at this level. So there's so much that goes into it where it just costs a lot of money. And it's obviously getting more expensive as time goes on, but it's really, when you look at it, hard to cut the costs, because I think what we do is, pretty extraordinary. Driving, a race car going nearly 200 miles an hour. It's not inexpensive by any means.
yeah. Now, if you look back at maybe older athletes, and I don't, for some reason, Babe Ruth comes to mind. He was like a chubby kind of potato guy, but he was the Babe, and he would knock home runs out. Or you would look at these, maybe some of the older race car drivers that weren't they didn't have a physical regimen that went into their training process so much. But now it's very much an athletic sport, and looking at you, you're very very physically fit. How does that side play into training for racing, and what do you do to stay on the top of your game?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people associate driving a race car with driving their regular street car to work, which is obviously not physically demanding, but a race car is 100% different than a normal car where, our races will be up to 2 hours long, and it can be 100. I've been in race cars that were 130, 140 degrees inside. The Indy Next and Indy cars have no power steering, so the wheel's super heavy. A lot of guys struggle with getting blisters on their hands, and a lot of fatigue goes into it. And then, not to mention the G forces associated. I don't know the exact number of G forces we go through, like in a corner, but I probably should have that statistic ready. But there's so much where there's all that physical aspect, and then you have to be 100% mentally focused. It's more of a mental sport than it is a physical sport. But when you're so tired and that's all you can think about, then your mental performance is going to decline significantly. So I always look at it as my job is to train however hard I have to, where when I drive, I'm in the race car, that it never even crosses my mind that I'm struggling physically in any way of my body. So then I can put 100% of my effort towards the mental side and focus exactly at, the task at hand, what I'm doing in the race car, what I'm trying to do. And I, never want my physical endurance and strength to be a negative factor.
So as you think of like you wake up on race day, how do you prepare mentally for that? Like, you kind of take me through. You wake up at X time, and I eat my bowl of Cheerios with some bananas on it, or whatever you do. There's a lot of people that have rituals and such.
Yeah, so I mean, with the physical side, obviously the training all happens, you know, way in advance. I go to the gym every day. I also do a lot of, like I said, it's mental. So I do a lot of training on my simulator. I do a lot of reaction training and different things of that sort to make my mind as prepared, because it's a sport where I can't just go in my backyard and practice. It's not like football or baseball where you can just go throw the ball in your backyard or go practice in a open grass field. It's we only get so much limited practicing, by the series actually limits how many days we get a year, which is only like 8 or 9 days. So you have to do, all the training you can outside of the car. But then when it comes to race day, you hope your fitness is already great at that point. I try to get, I typically pretty healthy, and I try to keep it that way on race weekends. Usually a bit more carbs, a lot of hydration, especially if it's a hotter weekend. I don't mind. A lot of drivers are like scared to eat a lot on race day for obvious reasons. For me, like I feel like I eat a lot just because I know that I'm going to burn a lot of calories. And I'm obviously drinking a lot of water and electrolytes and whatnot. But I don't really have anything too specific. I mean, some races I have to wake up at like 5 in the morning, depending on, we'll have a practice at 8 a.m. or something like that. But other weekends, our race on Sunday will be at 11, so I won't have to get there till 8:30 or 9. So it really just depends. I mean, I don't really, I guess I'm not too interesting here. I don't have any pre-race rituals or crazy thing I do. I like to get, a 10, 15, 10 minute little warm up of light jog or push-ups or kind of whatever it is before the race, just to, kind of wake my mind and my body. So I'm ready for that first lap, especially if it's the race, but nothing too crazy. And I mean, this is something I've been doing since I was 9 years old, obviously at a much higher level now, but um, everything you do for a long amount of time begins to feel somewhat normal. Even, going the speed of 200 miles an hour, after about 3 or 4 laps, you've like, if the first practice of the weekend, first lap I'll go out there, I'm like, dang, like I feel like I'm going quick. And then about 3 laps later, I'm like, all right, like I'm adjusted to this. And then about by the end of the first practice session, it everything, your mind adjusts, your eyes automatically start looking so far ahead, and you're like, okay, like I kind of feel like I'm not even going that fast, which is obviously so relative. But it's just things you get used to, and I feel like I've trained my body and my mind in order to do this, in order to compete at this high level. And I've got a lot of laps and a lot of experience under my belt where this stuff kind of comes naturally to me now, and I kind of instantly know where the limit of the car is. And I mean, I can go to a new track and feel comfortable within 5, 10 laps of never seeing the place, where obviously I wasn't like that 5 years ago. So it's just things that you get used to. And I'm making it sound like simple now, which it's definitely not. But just like any sport or any job or whatnot, you start to learn things and it becomes more natural over time.
Yeah. Well, and so you've come up through all of, from the pretty rudimentary carts to these cars that are really technologically advanced now. How has technology impacted in what you're doing for your racing strategy and performance, getting to this higher level?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I would say, at least of what I can think of, racing has probably the most technology in it over pretty much any sport. Our cars, when my grandpa raced, his Indy car was a mechanical beast. It was, carburetor, and it was I don't know, there was not much technology or electronics involved. But now when I almost look at a race car now as like, it's almost a computer in a sense that has wheels, tires, shocks, but it's run off of a computer. And especially in the sports car stuff, which is even a little bit more advanced in technology in the F1 cars. Indy cars still not behind, but I think they've kept technology out of it a little bit compared to those other forms of racing, kind of intentionally. But I mean, when I come off, right, obviously I'm talking to my team on the radio. I have on my steering wheel, I have 20 buttons. I can adjust everything from the roll bar, which is like a handling adjustment, to the throttle map, so how sensitive I want the throttle. It's kind of a brief explanation of it, which there's a button on my steering wheel that I can use in the race that's push to pass. So I have 100 seconds during the race where I can use that button, and it's like a turbo. It gives me an extra 50 horsepower in order to help me pass people during the race. That's another thing we have to manage as drivers. So there's so much computer involved. Even while I'm driving, I have a screen that tells me lap times, to what gear I'm in, temperatures of the car. And then you get off the racetrack, your engineer comes, plugs his computer into the race car, clicks downloads like every single little piece of data you can imagine that could be possible. He downloads it on his computer in 5 seconds. We go in the trailer, and I'll look at, on my quickest lap, the exact speed, exactly how I used the brakes, where I got on the throttle, and then I'll compare that to my teammate, excuse me, and see exactly what he does, where I gain time, where he gains time, where I lose time. And then I'll go through that as a driver, make notes so I can make adjustments when I go back on track. But then the engineer looks at exactly how much the shock moves on this bump in this corner, to exactly, when I get on the throttle, does it spin the tires? All of that is on data and on, through technology and the computer system on the car. And there's so much of that that has to be analyzed in order to interpret that information to make changes that will make me in the car handle and make me go faster. So I mean, there's so much to it, but I think that's what makes it exciting. And it's very different than my grandpa's era, where they just went out and drove and told the team, you know, what the car felt like, and then the team would make an educated guess on kind of what would help that. And there was a lot more of, we call it seat of the pants, of feel of the driver, where now we go look on exactly what's happening on a screen, and we have cameras as well. So there's so much to it. And I think as you get older, and I think I'm getting to that level where I'm learning how to use all that stuff to my advantage now, and kind of really understand how to make a race car go faster, not just when I'm on the track, but off the track.
What how do you manage like your personal life, your work life balance, if you will? I mean, you were going to school, you were doing racing, and you have to have time off on your own. How with that many things, how do you manage your personal life as well?
Yeah, I mean, so after I finished college, I didn't go and, get a traditional job or anything. The racing is 100% what I'm focused on. I moved to Indianapolis, which is kind of the center of IndyCar racing. I travel an insane amount, which is good and bad. Can get a little tiring, but excuse me. I also, I guess for work per se, I do. A lot of coaching. I coach a guy that races, an older gentleman driver that races sports cars. So I was in Texas this last weekend, Friday through Sunday. And then this weekend, it's the Indianapolis 500. And I have some sponsors coming to town, and I'm kind of showing them a good time on the race weekend because I'm not racing anything this weekend. So there's a lot of business and coaching and different things. Obviously I travel for my races, and then I also go to a lot of races even if I'm not racing, just to network, meet people, meet sponsors, talk to teams, kind of just show my face, which has been quite a bit. I've done quite a bit of that this year. And then obviously during the week, it's more focused on the sponsorship side and marketing proposals, social media, lots of phone calls, and I mean, typical business stuff. But for me, it's for me to become a race car driver. And then I mix that in with my simulator training and gym training as well. So there's a lot to it, but I feel like now that I've lived in Indianapolis, it's a bit less balanced. It's kind of just been living the racing life. When I was in school the last 3.5 years, I had, quite a bit of friends and different things going on there, but obviously stayed focused on the racing stuff as well. So yeah, I guess I'm not explaining too much balance right now in my life, but I've loved every minute of being here in Indianapolis for the Indianapolis 500. They practiced for 2 full weeks, and I pretty much went out to the track and watched every day the last couple of weeks that I wasn't out of town. So it's been fun so far. And I mean, my whole life's been racing, and that's my passion, and that's what I love to do. And I live the life for sure.
So interesting, a couple things that the analytics side is so important, just like it is for a business to really be able to study and make sure that your business machine is running smooth. And then it's the same thing for the race car. And then on the coaching side of what you do, I do business coaching, and it's very, very gratifying for me, especially when you kind of help somebody realize their potential, or a light comes on for them and they can like make a move to the next level or something that was blocking them. When you're doing the coaching with guys and it's specifically about driving, how does that work? Do you just kind of like present ideas to them and like help them figure it out themselves, or is it more of like a consulting thing where you really come in and say you need to do this, this, and this?
Yeah, I would say more the second thing you said, where I'll come, obviously I'll send him some notes, and even with some of my drivers, I try to do like simulator work with them before the race weekend. So, for example, like my the driver I was working with last weekend, we were racing at Coda in Texas, and that's on iRacing in the simulator. So ideally, I'd like to do like a couple hour session of me and him, kind of both running on the track on the simulator because it's the exact same track. I can give him feedback, and when we get to the racetrack, especially if the driver's never been there, it'll feel like he's already driven that racetrack and know what to expect, kind of in the groove of things already. And then when it comes on the race weekend specifically, what I do is, like I said, I download all the data from the car, and obviously there's an engineer that's doing more of the setup of the car, but my job is to get that data going, present it to the driver, see exactly how he's hitting the brakes, his techniques of, you know, when he's getting on throttle, how much speed he's carrying. And I'll compare it. You have the data, and then you also have the video where I can see what lines he's driving and whatnot. And I'm pretty much telling him kind of what I would do differently and how to go quicker using that information available. Obviously, I think the best way to teach someone is not exactly how to drive, but give them the right ideas and feedbacks where then they can go figure it out themselves. Because as a race car driver, you can't have someone telling you exactly how to drive every corner of the racetrack. You have to give them the right ideas and techniques in order for them to go out there and try different things to be able to figure out what's quicker themselves. So it's tricky and it takes time. And I've coached everything from 6, 7 years old kids in karting to 55-year-old gentlemen drivers that are pretty much starting their race car careers later in their life, that have made money in business and now want to get into racing. So I've kind of coached everything in between, but I definitely do enjoy it. Like you said, it's definitely satisfying in that I'm able to make people better at something I love and they love. And it's cool to, I've won a lot of races as a driver, but I've also won a lot coaching kids, especially in karting the last 7 years. So it's definitely, I definitely do. It's not the same passion I have for driving, but I definitely do love it.
So when we look at your business side, like you're basically a celebrity, and you have to have a whole marketing strategy behind it. Do you work with a separate team that does the marketing stuff for you, or do you handle a lot of that, and what kind of a marketing strategy works for somebody in your position?
Yeah, so I believe it or not, I actually do like at least my social media all myself. I think I've tried to have people help. Like obviously I have people taking pictures and taking videos, and sometimes people will edit some videos for me, but I kind of enjoy editing videos. So I actually do most of that myself. I think it is more authentic when it comes from me rather than, I mean, people want to follow me to learn about my life behind the scenes and whatnot. And I think you can make that too corporate and it doesn't do well. And I've seen that with a lot of people. So I try to keep that very personal. The marketing, I think I have a big role in it, especially like this is my full-time job essentially. So I'm not just kind of handing it over to other people because I know I have great people around me, but I still have the belief that if you want something, done to the level that I want it to be done, then I think I don't have to do it by myself, but I have to be involved and overseeing and kind of leading the path of the team really. So, but we talked about Ralph, who's great, Mike Cole, who's been helping me, a bunch of other people. So, I have the right people and whatnot. And I think I mean, the marketing strategy is, I mean, decently simple. I mean, there's more to it than people think. Where obviously there's the social media. In my grandpa's day, you would just put the logo on the car, and that was the end of the sponsorship. But it doesn't really work like that. But obviously the branding is big. But I think what's huge right now is bringing the companies and the people and letting them use the racetrack, but bringing people to the racetrack that are sponsoring you, letting them make it company events, letting them bring, let's say it's, a company that wants to get this other company's business. Well, if they're sponsoring the race car and they'll have a great hospitality, great setup, it's a fun thing to do. They'll invite the owner or the top executive of that business to come to the racetrack with them. So it's like, taking the guy to go play golf, but almost at a higher level. You're taking him to a huge race, and a lot of people don't want to turn those opportunities down. So there's a lot of things you can do to get people interested. I talked a little bit about investment fund, of people getting behind me more financially behind the scenes than, a company sponsorship. So there's a lot of different ways to come up with money and market yourself as a driver. But I think being authentic is something that I've kind of always wanted. And yeah, I think social media is definitely huge right now. And there's a lot of interest in racing with Formula One. Drive to Survive is kind of what that kicked off the younger generation loving racing right now. So IndyCar's, I think, doing pretty well. F1's obviously huge right now, and just trying to ride off of that momentum on social media is what I've been trying to do lately.
Yeah. Well, what kind of a strategy works best for you? Picture posts or short videos? And what you had said is like, uh, it was dead on of what I was thinking. Like people do want to, they want to know you. They want to know, like, like what's this guy eating for breakfast or what's he doing when he's, going here. And I think that a really solid shorts and reels strategy, just like
Mhm.
walking around the race car and talking about this is the steering wheel. It has all these 20 buttons on it that you mentioned. I think a whole bunch of those little things would really, really work great. But I don't see anybody in the racing world really taking that approach with those, which are so consumable and so easily spreadable.
Yeah, I pretty much solely, at least on Instagram, I hardly ever post pictures. It's almost solely reels. Like if I post a reel, it's usually between like 40,000 to a million views. Um, and then if I post an Instagram a picture, it gets like 500 likes. So there's almost like no point of me posting pictures compared to reels. And I think, like you said, like I don't think people did a great job of that up until about 3 years ago or so. But I think the last 3 years, everyone's really started to take advantage of showing behind the scenes, even just not just drivers, but the teams. So there is a lot of that now. So it's definitely a bit more competitive. But I think the reels do really well for me. That's kind of what's grown my fan base quite a bit. When I raced the NASCAR stuff, there was a lot of fans at the lower level, so that also kind of helped initially. But yeah, I mostly focus on Reels. I do TikTok, but for some reason, I'll post the same video on Instagram Reels versus TikTok, and I'll get 100 times more engagement on Instagram. Which for most people, a lot of people, it's the opposite, where they can't get their Instagram growing at all, but their TikTok's doing really well. But for me, it's the opposite, which is honestly good. I think companies still Instagram's a bit better for the sponsorship stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I make pretty much all my Instagram reels. Like, I have a lot of reels that I do, kind of almost a series where it's me sitting right here, pretty much like this. Excuse me. But above my head will be like an onboard of a pass that I'm like, of me in a race. So I'm making this pass or avoiding this crash, and I'll be sitting here talking, kind of explaining what's going through my mind as this is happening. So those do really well, and then kind of just more catchy songs or whatnot. But I actually enjoy it. I think it's fun to like think of a video and you're like, okay, like is this gonna do well or blah blah blah. But like being creative with it, and sometimes like I'll make something on my phone in like 10 seconds. I'm like, oh, like I just need to pump something out today, and that'll get like 500,000 views, but then I'll sit there and edit a video for like 3 hours, like making it perfect, and then I'll post that and it'll get 10,000 views. So it's kind of fun, and just be able to see like what people are interested in and then expand on the content that does well.
Yeah, and that's a fun side too. Definitely
Hmm.
keep up, but don't forget, people are your fans. They want to know what you're eating for dinner. It sounds
Yeah.
crazy, but they really do, and I think that you really can draw people in to make them more part of your story like that. So if one more question about the sponsor stuff. It seems one of my old companies that I was with, we were one of the main sponsors for the Blanc Pain World Challenge series, SRO series, and
Hmm.
we spent a whole bunch of money to be sponsors there, but getting an ROI for us was really difficult. So how do you demonstrate value to the sponsors when you're talking to them to show that it's going to be mutually beneficial for you and for the sponsor themselves?
Yeah, so that's definitely tricky, especially at this level. I'm not at the top level. I'm not racing the Indianapolis 500 this weekend that has 350,000 people at it. This series below that doesn't get nearly as much attention, but I think, like I said, it's so much more, and it has to be in order for it to be successful for both sides. So much more than just slapping the logo on the side of the car, posting the logo on Instagram, saying, "Oh, this company's sponsoring me." I think that doesn't necessarily work these days. So I think being creative and creating opportunities. Like I have a sponsor where I'm going to multiple events for them this year and getting in front of their company and other potential investors of the company, and they're creating interest for them internally, which is big. And then also bringing 30 people out to the race I'm doing at Mid Ohio, which is going to do well for them. And then obviously there is the social media, the marketing, the newsletters and whatnot that give them the branding, but you have to be more. Obviously, I'll create some. We just talked about reels, and I'll create some reels kind of that are interesting and people want to watch, not just all like corporate company based stuff, because that's not going to get any views, but create something fun in order to get the views, but then also show the company. So I think there's a lot that you can do, and I understand that it's hard to justify from a company's perspective, but I think it takes both me and my team doing the right things, and also the company being able to work with us and help us and come up with the right strategies that make sense for them to be able to utilize the sponsorship as best as possible for what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, like I said, it can be tricky, but I think if both parties work well, then there's definitely still it makes a lot of sense still for a lot of companies.
Incredible. I really love how we were able to tie the business side of what you do and the marketing side and the sponsors and the racing and the professional side and the mental and physical abilities side all together to make everything so comprehensive and just like into one ball. It seems like you're on a really, really cool trajectory in your career, and I'm super excited for where you're going. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you thought this guy certainly is going to ask me this question?
Um, you put me on the spot now. Not necessarily. I think this year, I'm doing a lot of sports car racing, which is exciting. It's kind of another avenue that I haven't really been in. Um, so I'm doing 4 races in the sports car this year. At the next one, Mid Ohio, and then we go to Toronto and Virginia, and then Road Atlanta, all with the IMSA series. So I'm really looking forward to that. I won the last 2 races, so I'm trying to keep that momentum going in that car. And then the one Indy Next race that I have for sure on the schedule is Mid Ohio, July 5th. So I'm looking for some more partners in order to do some more of the Indy Next races at the end of this year, and then the main goal is to be full time in the Indy Next series next year in order to win that championship and move to IndyCar. So that's kind of what the near future looks like for me, and just stay on the grind and hopefully create some more opportunities and have some success on the sponsorship side to be able to be in the car a bit more, and just continue on the forward path to kind of achieve the goal of IndyCar and the Indianapolis 500.
So cool, so cool, so cool. Well, man, thank you so much for giving me some of your time to hang out and talk and about your career and everything that you're doing. I'm humbled and super fascinated by the whole darn thing.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I enjoy these podcasts where I get to talk about the business side as well quite a bit, because that's, 97% of what I do. I feel like driving the race car is the fun part, and only happens about 3% of the time. So it's cool to talk about the day to day and what it all takes in order to be able to achieve what I'm trying to.
Awesome. That was an incredible conversation with Jagger Jones. He shared so much about his journey, challenges he's faced, and how he's overcoming them. Now, let's dive a little deeper into some of the points that Jagger brought up and apply them to the world of business. Point 1. Securing sponsorships and funding in racing. Securing sponsorships and funding is crucial for success. Jagger emphasized the importance of building personal relationships and demonstrating value to potential sponsors. This is a vital lesson for any business. Building strong relationships and clearly showing the return on investment can make the world of difference in securing funding. Whether you're pitching to investors or clients, it's essential to have mutual beneficial partnerships that provide real value. Point 2. The role of team dynamics in Jagger's success relies heavily on having the right team around him. From engineers to mechanics, every member plays a crucial part in his achievements. In business, assembling a team of skilled and dedicated individuals who work well together can propel your company to new heights. Each team member brings unique strengths and perspectives, and fostering a collaborative environment can lead to innovative solutions and greater overall success. Point 3. Marketing and personal branding. Jagger highlighted the power of marketing and personal branding and managing his social media presence. Engaging authentically with his audience has been a key to attracting sponsors and fans alike. For any business, maintaining an active and genuine presence on social media can enhance your brand visibility and customer loyalty. It's important to connect with your audience on a personal level, sharing not just your successes but also the journey and challenges along the way. These lessons from Jagger's career are directly applicable to the business world. Whether you're an entrepreneur or a business leader, focusing on building relationships, assembling a strong team, and maintaining a robust online presence can significantly contribute to your success. And finally, we have our segment for the Details podcast that we call Q&A. These are questions that are sent in by listeners and viewers like yourself, and I'm really excited to answer them. The first one comes in from Sarah in Los Angeles, and she asks, what are some of the biggest challenges Jagger faced in securing sponsorship, and how did he overcome them? Jagger mentioned that securing sponsorships is one of the toughest parts of being a race car driver, especially at the levels below the top series. The biggest challenge is to convince the companies that the value that they're going to get from sponsoring him. And it's not just about putting a logo on the side of a car. It's about creating a partnership that provides them with real benefits. Jagger overcomes these challenges by focusing on personal relationships, demonstrating his dedication and potential, and showing how companies can leverage motorsports for their marketing and business goals. Next, we have a question from Mike in Chicago. He wants to know, Dan, how important is social media for Jagger's career, and what strategies has he found most effective? Social media is incredibly important in today's world. Jagger highlighted that it's a key tool for building his personal brand and connecting with fans and sponsors. The most effective strategy for him has been to stay authentic and engage with his audience. Posting behind-the-scenes content, race highlights, and personal stories helps him connect to people on a deeper level. He specifically mentioned that videos, shorts, and reels have been very effective for reaching a wider audience, and that sounds pretty darn familiar. And our last question comes to us from John in New York. He says, Dan, what advice did Jagger give to young drivers who are just starting out? Jagger's advice to young drivers is to stay passionate and dedicated. The journey to professional racing is long and challenging, but if you truly love the sport, it's going to be well worth it. He emphasizes the importance of building skills both on and off the track. This includes learning about the mechanics of the car, maintaining physical fitness, and developing good communication skills to effectively work with a team. Most importantly, he stresses the need to never, ever give up. Setbacks are part of the journey, just like in business, but resilience and determination will help you succeed. Thank you to everyone who took some time to send in some questions. It's always great to hear from our listeners and address the topics that you're actually curious about. This has been an enlightening episode of the Details Podcast with Jagger Jones. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Sharing is caring. And until next time, keep your engines running and your car glossy.